Welcome back to the Leadership Launchpad Project. I'm your host, flying solo today, Susan Hobson, and I'm so incredibly excited to introduce you to our guest today, Laura Gassner Otting. She is the Wall Street Journal best-selling author of the new book, Wonder Hell: Why Success Doesn't Feel Like It Should and What to Do About It. I am so excited to talk to her. She also had a TED Talk on the very same subject with 2 million views. So clearly I am not the only one who is excited to hear about this theme. Laura, welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project. It's so wonderful to have you.
Well, I'm excited to be here, Susan, and I'm glad I get you all to myself.
Yeah, right? I feel like, God works in mysterious ways. I think we're going to have a fantastic conversation because as I was reading the title of your book, I laughed out loud, literally right away, saying, oh my gosh, I resonate with this so deeply. I have so many clients who come through my door complaining about the very fact. I remember actually when I graduated from Princeton back in the day, they had this article in our Daily Princetonian right on the front page of the day I graduated. And it was called Happiness When Syndrome. And it was this recent bit of research that the psychology department had released in terms of like what happens after graduation for these kids, and it was actually going and tracking classes all the way, into the ethers. And the statistics in terms of who actually reported being happy were horrible. And I'll never forget coming out those Princeton gates having read that article. So tell me, what inspired you to do this TED Talk and then write this book?
So I just have to say, I think "I'll be happy when" are the 4 worst words in the English language, because it's like, I'll be happy when I get the job. I'll be happy when I get promoted. I'll be happy when I get the corner office. I'll be happy when I get married. I'll be happy when I get divorced. I'll be happy when. Like, we keep doing that, and we think that we're like one diet, one purchase, one promotion away from finally being happy, but we're never actually happy because we're on this hedonic treadmill. And then as soon as we get one brass ring, there's another that's ahead of us, right? You get the big promotion, you join the country club, and then there's a nicer country club across the street. So you work really hard to go to the nicer country club across the street, and then it's like across the lake, there's an even nicer one. And then we're working so hard that the only time we actually see the country club is when our kids post on Instagram pictures of themselves at the pool, right? And we're like, well, that sucks for me, right? It's great for them. So, I couldn't launch into the book without just hitting the "I'll be happy when," because I had this like bee in my bonnet about this expression. And whenever anybody ever says, well, I'll be happy when, like, things will get calmer after, like it'll get easier when, it's like, no, it doesn't. So my book Wonder Hell kind of sort of starts in this space. So when I wrote Limitless, which was my last book, I had 0 platform. I barely started public speaking. Like, I'd sold a very successful company, and I sort of made my money, and I was like, great, I'm done. And then I'd had this crisis of identity when I'm like, well, I'm no longer LGO CEO. Like, who am I? And so I, because I'm super clever, bought the website lauragasnerotting.com, and I just started blogging about things that were bothering me in the world. And I got asked to do a TEDx. Now, my first reaction to wanting to being asked at that was to say, like, no way, I don't want to do it. That's terrifying. I don't want to speak in public. But my kids were in the backseat, and they kind of dared me into it. And that talk got a little bit of attention, not the $2 million one, or 2 million view talk, that's a separate one. But the first one got a little attention. I got asked to speak places. And I was starting to notice that when I was on stage speaking, the other people on the bill with me who were getting paid, quote unquote, real money, they all had books. So I was like, I better get me one of them. So I wrote Limitless, and it debuted at #2 on the Washington Post bestseller list, right behind Michelle Obama. And I was like, oh, that's really exciting. But I was so exhausted from the work that it took to get that book out that the part of my brain that normally dictates my humility was just asleep. And when my publisher texted me and said, you just debuted, Washington Post bestseller, #2, all I could think of was #2. How do you get to be #1? I want to be #1. Oh, I want to Washington Post. How do you get to the Wall Street Journal? And I was suddenly filled with excitement and humility, a little bit, and love and gratitude that I had achieved this thing I'd never thought I could even achieve. It was wonderful. But I was immediately then faced with this, what else can I do? who else can I be? I saw this version of myself that I didn't know was possible. And then I had hunger and desire and imposter syndrome and doubt and dread and envy and exhaustion. All these other feelings came pouring at me. So it was wonderful. And at the same moment, it was also kind of hell. And I
Mm.
found myself in wonder hell. And I realized that wonder hell is the space in your psyche where the burden of your potential shows itself to you and goes,
Oh,
hey, what are you going to do with me? Are you going to live into this newfound potential that you didn't even know you had last week, last month, last year? Or are you going to let it pass you by? What are you going to do? And so I found myself in wonder hell. And I started talking to other really interesting people who I'd met in green rooms, in my career in speaking,
mhm.
first of glass ceiling shatters, Olympic medalists, startup unicorns, all of these like really amazing people who'd achieved really amazing things. And I was like, how did you survive this moment? And much to my chagrin, but also to my liberation, what I learned is that they didn't survive it. They just learned how to thrive in it. And so wonder
Ooh,
how why,
so good.
why success doesn't feel like it should and what to do about it is all about this moment when we
Mm.
realize that there is even more inside of us, but how do we handle all of the tsunami of emotions that are coming at us in that moment?
Ooh, this is so, so good. I have so many places I want to go with you already. Yeah, I definitely want to talk about why it takes a high achiever pain and the chokehold to awaken us to our untapped potential. But I want to back the game tape all the way up. And I want to get curious about where the heck this even comes from. Why are we set up in this way that puts us on this track that looks like striving to the outside world, but is actually surviving on the inside,
Well,
right?
I think it comes from a place of hunger, right? I mean, like we have evolved to be species who evolve. We're
Mhm,
constantly growing and changing and shifting and innovating and iterating. Even if we're not doing it consciously, our cells are doing it, right? We are
mhm,
changing all the time. And so we would not have survived this long if we were not built to continue to adapt and to strive and to thrive. So even if you don't want to do it, there is something inside of you that's always going to be over here going like, what about this? Couldn't this
mhm,
be cool? What do you
mhm,
think of this possibility? But here's the good news. Wonder Hell only presents itself to people who are worthy of it. So if you have reached your limit, like you're not going to go any further. Like I run marathons and
mhm,
the word run does a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence because I finish marathons. I don't always necessarily run the whole thing, but I know that as I'm getting older, I'm not going to get faster. I could do more interesting races. I could do all the major marathons. I could do one on every continent, right? Like there are different goals that I can have, but I'm not going to be constantly hungry for how do I get 4 hours? How do I get 3 hours and 30 minutes, right? Like, so it's not that we're constantly throwing ourselves into this. It's impossible. Let me self harm to get to this place. But we're always interested in like, how do I peel the onion in a different way? How do I make this goal interesting in a new way? And if you're somebody who is this curious and interested and striving kind of person, we can do it in a way that the goals are interesting, even if they're not harmful to us.
mhm. Let's talk about the ones that become harmful for us, because I feel like for a high achiever, that striving on the outside, that surviving on the inside, oftentimes comes because they are, I always say this too, Laura, it comes from such a good place. We care about excellence. We care about how we show up in the world, right? But when we're sent into that gauntlet as a high achiever, whether that be academically or sport as kids, and then all of a sudden the rules or the playbook suggests that we need to win in order to feel good enough, right? Like it really does start to impact our self-worth, right?
Absolutely, 100%. And this book is sort of based on the premise that I put out in my last book, Limitless, with the subtitle of which is How to Ignore Everyone, Carve Your Own Path, and Live Your Best Life. And
Mhm.
I subtitled it that because I spent 20 years in executive search. My job in executive search was to call the most successful people, bold-faced names, and recruit them away on behalf of my clients. So it was my job to call the most successful people. But despite all this success, which is why I was calling them, they weren't very happy. So they were all calling me back. And I was
Yeah.
fascinated about this idea that these people who are in the corner office in these really important organizations doing really important jobs are still not happy. then what's the problem? And what I came to understand is that at some point when we're 15, 16, 17 years old, somebody says, pick a job, pick a major, pick a college, pick a
Mm-hmm.
trade, pick a path. And we go, okay, but do you know what you don't have when you're 15, 16, 17 years old?
Lots still. I have a
Right? You don't have
12-year-old at
common
home.
sense. You don't
Yeah.
have perspective. You
Mm-hmm.
don't have information. But most
Mm-hmm.
importantly, you don't have a frontal lobe, like the actual part of your
Mm-hmm.
brain that helps you make good, sound, logical decisions doesn't
Mm-hmm.
actually fully exist until 10 years after we're
Mm-hmm.
asked to make this decision. That's going to impact the very rest of our lives. So at some point, we are handed this definition of success by a
Mm-hmm.
teacher, by a parent, by the internet, right? By an
Mm-hmm.
influencer, by somebody who says, this is what success looks like. And we go, okay, I'm going to create an entire life that gets me there. And we never stop to think, is that what success looks like for me? So there are
Mm-hmm.
like 8 motivating factors that'll interest anybody at any time into looking at a job that I'm calling them up to recruit them away for. And there are things like, what's the mission of the organization? Am I inspired by the leader? How many skills will I learn? How deep is the impact? How broad is, the experience? How prestigious will this look on my resume? How much money will I make, et cetera, et cetera? But here's the kicker. Every one of us at every age and at every life stage will prioritize that list differently. So,
Mm-hmm.
if you're young and you don't have a lot of control in your life and, you're just trying to like get the most prestigious job to get your career, going at the biggest trajectory, you might sacrifice mission. You might sacrifice how much you're going to make as long as that is like a leapfrogging thing. Then when you're in your
Mm-hmm.
middle years, maybe you're like, these are my big earning years. I have to really think about that, et cetera, et cetera. So at every age and at every life stage, I'm an empty nester now. So I'm really interested in following joy and curiosity, not necessarily, making sure that I'm in the most prestigious job. I want to like have flexibility and go, have a good time and go on more vacations and visit my kids. So nobody ever says this is what makes a good job good for you. They just give us
Mm-hmm.
the first part. This is what makes a good job good. So we're handed this definition. So this external striving ends up looking like surviving on the inside because you can't be insatiably hungry for somebody else's goals. And when you're
Mm-hmm.
following somebody else's definition of success, by definition, you're following somebody else's goals.
Mm-hmm. That's the difference between stress and passion. And yes, it registers very similarly in the nervous system, folks, kind of like anxiety and excitement.
Exactly. But I would say this, I think follow your passion is maybe the next worst expression
Woo!
after I'll be
Let's go
happy when.
there. Yes.
Okay. So
Let's talk
we're
about that.
told follow your passion. And then you think like, okay, all I got to do is find my passion and then follow it and the money will follow.
Oh,
And it
yeah.
turns out that's
Incomplete
not,
advice.
yeah, it's incomplete advice because follow your passion says all you got to do is find it and follow it and everything's good. But the first time you get turned down, the first
Yeah.
time you get rejected, the first time your favorite client leaves you, but your worst employee is sticking around, like the
Mm-hmm.
first time it gets hard, you go, oh, I guess must not be my passion.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like that girl in
Mm-hmm.
the flower crown on Instagram who's like namasteing over Coachella. Like she's following her passion, maybe, right? She's like probably in like a rented,
Yeah.
Lamborghini and all the rest of the nonsense that's up there. It's incomplete advice. And I think what we need to do is we need to invest in our passion. We should follow our curiosity and invest in our passion. But like everyone's always like, tell me what you would do if you knew you couldn't fail. That's
Mm-hmm.
your passion. And I'm like, no, tell me what you would do if you knew for sure you would fail. And yet you would do it over and
Mm.
over and over and over
Yeah.
until you got it right. Because doesn't your passion deserve that? Don't follow your passion, invest in your passion.
Oh, that's so good. Double down on the passion every single day because it's true. As we evolve, we discover new passions that need to be incorporated into the repertoire, right?
And we
What
should get rid of old ones if things are not serving us any longer. We don't need to continue to like cobble together all these things and keep carrying all of them with the backpack getting heavier and heavier and heavier.
Mhm.
I think that we shouldn't be pursuing success. We should be pursuing consonance, right? This
Oh.
alignment, this flow. Like we know the
Mm.
word dissonance, right? Cacophony, noise,
Mhm.
the sort of this clanky organ failure rejection that we're having. But consonance is the opposite of dissonance, right? It's when we're in alignment, when we're in harmony, when we're in flow, when the very best of what you do, what you love to do and are good at doing, is being called upon to solve a problem you actually care about solving. And you're being rewarded for solving that problem in some way that is financially, karmically, emotionally meaningful to you. So the very best of what you do, solving a problem you actually care about solving and being rewarded for it in a way that matters to you. That's consonance. That's when everything you do matches everything you are.
Very similar to the Japanese saying ikigai. Have you come
Exactly.
across that? Yeah, it's like
Yes.
we call it the sweet spot because we're athletes, you know, we put
Yes.
everything into an athletic
Yes.
frame. But it is this idea that there is this confluence of connection points inside of us, inside of our authentic self, right? That has access to a knowingness about what we value and what we're great at, the value we have to bring, and what the world needs that we care about, right? In
Yes.
terms of the impact that we can make.
Yes, and to put this in athletic terms, as we mentioned before we started recording, I'm a rower, and
Mhm.
I was in a shell with 8 women rowing today in a coxswain. And from the outside, it looks like all 8 of us are doing exactly the same thing in unison, right? And you
Mhm.
hear all of these people who don't know anything about rowing being like, for the team to work together, everyone has to do the same thing in
Yeah.
unison. Well, it turns out in a rowing shell, there are 8 rowers, but we're all doing a little bit of different things. So the stroke seat, the people who are, you know, who are up front, they're setting the rhythm, they're setting the pace, they're making sure that we have good ratio and good rhythm in the boat. The middle 4, that's the powerhouse. So they are just pushing and pulling, and they're like that's your horsepower that's there. And then I'm sitting back in bow seat, so me and the woman in front of me, the bow pair, we are like trying to make sure the boat is set, the boat is even, we're setting the table so that everyone has plenty of space to tilt their oar and get it in the water and grab every ounce of that water so that they can push back as hard as they can to push that boat, to lift it up off the water and fly down the river. So even though from the outside it looks absolutely like everyone's doing the same, our definition of success is exactly the same thing. Internally, we're all doing something different to make it go forward.
Oh, I love that so much. Yeah, I feel like that is alignment from a team perspective, group flow, or
Mm-hmm.
what my coach used to say, full engagement.
Full engagement,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, because it's like a total congruence on the goal, but everybody has their role and everybody knows their role, like spokes on the wheel, making that
And
wheel go fast, you know?
absolutely. Yeah. And it turns out like if you're 8 rowers in a boat and you're each putting your oar in just a microsecond different than the others, it doesn't matter how hard you push. It doesn't matter how much you drop that hammer. It doesn't matter how much you want it. The brake boat's not going to go fast because each one of those little micro changes, I mean, those are like brakes, right? So
Hmm.
so we all have to work together. And I think part of that is to make sure that you have people on your team in
Hmm.
life who are also sharing that definition of success with you. They don't have to be doing the same thing, but they should at
Hmm.
least see your definition of success and honor it and respect it and help you get there.
Love this so much. I want to make sure I remember to back up to that question because I really am curious about your perspective on this. We see that it takes that pain to be the catalyst to awaken a high achiever to their highest potential and to even ask themselves questions like, is this what success means to me? Am I happy? Am I truly, truly happy? What does happy even mean? Like, why do you feel, in your perspective, and all this amazing work you're doing on this subject? Why do you feel that it takes pain to catalyze our highest potential as high achievers?
I mean, if I could just make this about as basic as I can make it, if you're
Mhm.
sitting on the couch and you have to pee, you're
Mhm.
gonna eventually get up and pee. But if
Mm.
the movie's good, if the game is close, you're snuggling with, you know, your best love, like you're not gonna get up unless you have to, right? Like
Yeah.
motivation starts with motive, right? Like the
Mhm.
reason for, like
Mhm.
you have to move. So I think it's like sometimes we just get very comfortable where we are because it's good enough. But you know, Whitney
Mhm.
Johnson, I write about this in Wonder Hell. Whitney
Mhm.
Johnson talks about the S curve, which is like if you imagine an S on its side, the
Mhm.
bottom of it is kind of flat, and you know, you don't really know what you're doing, and it's kind of hard, and you're not making a lot of progress. And then you sort of hit the curve coming up, and suddenly you're like, oh, I'm figuring it out. I'm getting it. It makes sense. I'm starting to see some wins. Okay. Then you get to the top of the S and you're like, I got it. No problem. I know exactly what I'm doing. And what happens then, though, is that we start to mail it in. We start to mail it in and we actually start to self-sabotage. And Whitney Johnson's one of the
Mm-hmm.
best business thinkers in the world. And I was interviewing her for Wonder Hell. And I was like, I don't know, that doesn't make any sense to me. Why would you self-sabotage if you're like at the top of your game? And she's like, well, tell me about a time you were at the top of your game and you
Mm-hmm.
got lucky. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought about it for a minute and I told her the story, which doesn't make me look very good. But the story is that I was 10 years into running my business and I was meeting with a very wealthy hedge fund manager on Park Avenue, right? Like I went up to like the 57th floor, looked out over the entire park, like Gordon Gekko giant desk, and I realized on the elevator up, I kind of not done any homework. He wanted us to find him the head of a family foundation. I was like, cool, whatever, no problem. And so I sort of did a little bit of homework in the elevator on the way up. And I learned, number one, I couldn't find a lot of information about him because he's pretty private. And number two, the only information I did find was that he has ice rinks in the back of all of his homes because he loves his kids' hockey. Uh, Even the one in the Bahamas. So I guess we're not giving to, global warming issues. So,
No.
so I get to
Uh-oh.
the top of the elevator and we walk into the office and he's like, okay, well, I'm getting a little older, so I want you to give some money to hospitals for us because I can get good care. And my kids are getting a little older, so I want you to give some money to colleges so that they get into a good school. Okay, good. You good? And he like sits back down and looks back at the trade, the trading computers in front of him. And I stood up and I stuck my hand out and I was like, well, sir, I don't think you need us because there's like 500 lawyers outside the store that can write this check. So it's been very nice to meet you. Thank you very much. And there were like 10 lawyers in the room and they all like stopped breathing and like turned ghostly white because I don't think anyone's ever said no to this guy before. And
Clearly.
they're like falling under the table. And he was like, I'm sorry, what? And I was like, I don't think you need us. He goes, well, what would you do? So I was like, well, in our extensive research that we did in preparation for this meeting, what we learned is that you're very private and you care a lot about your kids' sports. So what if we found somebody who could help you create a partnership between a local hospital and a university for, say, I don't know, the foremost research program on childhood concussion injuries? How about that? All the lawyers are not breathing. He looks me dead in the eye. He goes, that sounds terrific. Find me that person. The lawyers start breathing again. Everything is great. And then I said, well, what if I found you somebody who spent more than 15 minutes actually helping you figure out a philanthropic strategy? And he was like, great, thank you very much. And on the elevator on the way down, I texted my business partner and I was like, I just got very lucky. And had that not gone well, it would have reflected poorly on me, on our company, on our clients, on our team. I think maybe it's time for an exit plan. And it was in that moment I realized that I was so busy mailing it in that I would have self-sabotaged the company. And so that pain point, I tell you that story because either the pain point finds you because you finish a race and you're like, well, if I strung two of those together, maybe I could, like I did a half marathon. Could I
Up
do a
the ante.
marathon? Right? You
Yeah.
either have it because you see this version of yourself and you get really excited by the possibility. Internal candidates always leave because in order to interview for the job, they have to wear the clothes of that role and speak in the voice of that role and think in the mindset of that role. And once they
Mm-hmm.
do that, they can't unsee it. So either you see the
Mm-hmm.
pain point, either you get it because you see the potential,
Mm-hmm.
or you get it because you realize just how risky it was. But either way, if you don't make a move in that moment, what happens at the end of that S curve is that you fall off the end. So either you leap to the next one or it finds you. So we always have to make that move. And so the amount of pain that you feel, I think, is directly in relation to the potential that you feel about yourself or just how much maybe you've been mailing in it up until that point.
Oh man, so many listeners out there right now are leaders because our audience is a bunch of leaders are definitely resonating with the phoning it in feeling. I often think that that's like your subconscious mind is literally designed for reconciliation, right? And like we said, we have this thing inside that knows why we're here and wants to grow and evolve towards it,
Yes.
right? So I feel like that's like sometimes Oprah used to say it's a gust of wind and then it's a brick upside the head, and you're not paying attention to some of the subtler clues. But I feel like in that cataclysmic moment, that's when you are finally able to recognize the signs that your subconscious mind is trying to send you. Because your subconscious mind doesn't want to just survive. Surely
Right.
it wants to thrive.
Right. And I think what happens is, we have these moments. They're sort of like a little, then all at once, right? It's like a little, and then she asks for a divorce. A little, and then you have a heart attack. A little, and then your kid has some, massive thing at school, and suddenly you're like, oh, right. You get the call, the accident, the diagnosis, the whatever the thing is, right? Again, your favorite client leaves, the worst employee doesn't. Like, there's always this moment. And I think it was Warren Buffett who said, when the tide goes out, you see who's not wearing shorts. And I think it's like, there's a moment where like, one. Yeah, I mean, it's great. So like, what happens? Like, we have a global pandemic, you have Lehman Brothers files for bankruptcy. Like, there are these moments, and in those moments, it exposes all the things that we haven't been prepared for. And suddenly you're like, oh, no, right? But I think that's what we live in fear of as leaders. There's going to be an emergency, there's going to be a crisis. What am I going to do? But we stop thinking to ourselves, well, what could I do? What's next? So I give a lot of keynotes, and I often speak to entrepreneurial groups. And sometimes when I speak to the younger ones, or the ones that are earlier in their career, I'll get a question during Q&A that goes something like, well, what would you do if you failed? And I'll ask them, I'll be like, well, okay, you're sitting here at an entrepreneurship conference. You're an entrepreneur. Do you have a business plan in your mind? I'm like, yeah, of course. And I'm like, great. What will you do if you fail? And the answer is always, oh, well, I'll just go get a job in a cubicle somewhere until I figure out the next thing, right? Or I've got savings, or, there's always a plan. They always have a plan. What would you do if you failed? They always have a plan B. And then I ask, what will you do if you succeed?
Oh, I love that question.
And I have been asking this question for nigh on 15
That's Marianne
years.
Williamson inspired right there.
Literally,
right? Our
I've
deepest fear.
never gotten an answer. It's always crickets. And so I think we spend so much time worrying about what happens if we fail, what's the crisis moment, that we don't think about what happens if we succeed. And here's the thing. There is science behind luck. Like, we can make our own luck. And the way we make our own luck is to be extroverted, is to say yes to things, is to assume that good things will happen. It will turn out well, is to put ourselves in the deal flow. And so if you don't imagine what will it look like if I succeed, then when opportunity comes along, you don't recognize it. So you can't make your own luck, because you don't say yes to the thing that looks like it might lead to the thing that will lead to the thing that actually will help you be successful. So I would encourage anybody who's listening to this, who's a leader, to worry about what happens if if the bottom falls out. Like, write it down, create a plan, then put that plan in the lower left drawer.
Yeah.
And now focus on what will happen if it all works out. What will you do? How will you capture opportunity? How will you capture the success? How will you capture these moments so that you can capitalize on these moments?
Ooh, I love this advice. Success is when preparation meets opportunity is probably one of my
Absolutely.
favorite definitions of success that I ever heard. And it's so true. If you're not on the ice, if you're not in the game, you're not going to score goals. You're not
Exactly,
going to win.
right? Wayne Gretzky, right? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Not taken.
Yeah.
My favorite quote of all time. We are so in alignment on that. Okay, the last place I want to go with you, I'd be remiss if I didn't take you here before I let you go. For all of our leaders listening out there who are surely hearing this call now, right? There's no accident that you're listening to this interview specifically today in this moment. So what would your counsel be? What would your advice be in terms of where they can begin to get into this type of alignment?
Well, I think the most important thing to do is to stop and say, did the definition of success that got me to where I am today, does it still fit me to where I want to go tomorrow? Because at every age and at every life stage, it changes. So we not only do we give ourselves a definition at 16, 17, 18 years old, we don't stop at 28, at 38, at 48, at 58 and go, do I still want to do that? Is that still interesting to me? And so I guess I would leave your listeners with my definition of success, which is that there are two numbers. There's the need to make number and the want to make number. How much do I need to make to put food on my table, to put my kids in school, to keep a roof over my head, to have enough savings in the bank, right? How much do I really need to make? And then how much do I want to make? How many vacations do I want to take a year? And are those vacations at the Ramada Inn or the Four Seasons? Am I driving a new car, and is that car a Hyundai or a BMW convertible? Like, no shade to the Ramada Inn or the Hyundai, but I'm just
Yeah, of
saying, right?
course.
Like,
Yeah.
am I giving back to my community? Am I doing that by building a park, or am I doing that by actually physically, like, am I endowing a park, or am I like physically putting a swing set together? Like, what do you want your life to look like? And then what does that life cost? That's your want to make number. So my definition of success right now is that in between my need to make number and my want to make number, it used to be driven by hunger, by ego, by all sorts of other things, external factors. And now my definition of success is that in between the need to make number and the want to make number, I want every single thing to be driven by curiosity and joy and impact.
Ooh, intrinsically motivated. I can see by that
Yes.
answer, which is the secret sauce
And
in
what I
terms.
would say is, I think as entrepreneurs, we are able to maximize on three things: uh, flexibility, profit, and impact. But I don't think we can maximize on all three at the same time. I think you got to pick one, maybe two, right? And in every season of your life, at every age and at every life stage, you have to choose. So when my kids were little, I wanted to maximize on flexibility. I wanted to be able to be there. I wanted to be able to go to the soccer game on a
Yeah.
Thursday afternoon. I wanted to be able to do that. I don't care if I worked on Saturday morning, but I wanted that kind of flexibility. As they got older and needed me less, I wanted to maximize profit. I wanted to make as much money as I possibly could, because this was the engine that was going to drive retirement. And then now, my kids they're older. I've sold the company. I'm writing books. I'm giving keynotes. I'm interested in maximizing impact, right? So you have to figure out which one or maybe two of those things are driving you right now. What do you want to maximize on in this moment in your life? Not anybody else's life, not your business coach's life, not anybody else's definition of success, but what matters to you, because kids spell love, Time, and you don't get that time back. So it's kind of okay to maybe put the brakes on this part of it if you want to put the gas on other parts of it. Again, you may also say, screw my kids, they'll take care of themselves. The best thing I can do is make as much money as possible for them. And then you like put the gas on the work. But everybody's definition is different. And I'm only giving you mine as an example. But we can all find our own definition. And my encouragement to people is to figure out what matters to you right now, not what mattered to you before, but what actually matters to you right now. And then figure out what of the flexibility, the impact, or the profits you want to maximize to get there.
I love it. I think you might be the first guest on our show talking about these very concepts to put purpose into a time-oriented context. I feel like that is never something that the experts say, but it's so
Really?
true. Yeah.
Well, shame on them.
Well, I just think it's different experiences, different entry points, surely. But no, I so resonate with this, obviously, as a mother, right? Because like I'm scaling a business, but I'm doing that in a very conscious way, because flexibility to me is like the number one value right now, because I want to be available. I want that high quality connection time. I'm like holding on for dear life to it in this individuation stage.
Absolutely.
So-
Listen, I'll also say this. The other day, I was talking to my younger son, and we were talking about apple picking, and I was like, "Oh my God, the way I move mountains to be able to chaperone all of those apple picking field trips." And I was just like,
Mhm.
I was kind of congratulating myself, but I was just sort of like,
Yeah.
"Wow, I was always there." And he literally looked at me. He's going to be 20 years old in a couple of days, and he literally looked at me and he was like, "You were there?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?
Oh
For
no, it
years, I
didn't
went to every single
land.
one of them." And he was like, "I gotta say," and like, "No offense, mom, but like, I don't actually remember you being at any of them,"
Oh,
because, but he's very self-aware. And again, as I said,
yeah.
he's almost 20. And he said, "But the fact that you were there, even if you'd only made it to one of them, the fact that you were there at any of them probably created a relationship that allowed us to have like the foundation of the relationship that we have
Totally.
today." So I'll also
Totally.
say, for any of the moms or dads listening that are like, "Oh, now I have to feel guilty about not being like there," I don't, you also don't need to be there. Like, our kids don't know what's not happening in everyone else's house. So like, if you show up for one apple picking field trip and then focus on your work for the rest, that's okay too, because that's enough. Like, that works.
You're talking about impact here a second ago, and that's where I want to land this plane. Although we're not landing anything, let's get all the way up into the right with it before we let you go, Laura. What do you want the impact of this mission that you're on to be someday? Have you thought about your legacy factor?
Yeah, I get asked this question a lot, actually, and where I think I've settled on it is that at my funeral, I just want people to say my life was a little better because she was in it. And it's
Mm,
really honestly as simple as that. It's not, I don't need a full
mm.
page obituary in the New York Times. I don't need a monument built to me. Like if people can say that their life was better because I was in it, then I've achieved something pretty special.
Yeah, you know you've made an impact when.
Yeah,
Mic drop.
that's it.
All right, Laura, this has been fantastic. I know that our audience is going to get oh so much out of this. Is there anything else that you'd like to leave our leaders with today before I let you go?
Yeah, I would just say if you want more of this concept, please check out the TEDx. It's got over 2 million views on TED.com. And Wonder Hell, why success doesn't feel like it should and what to do about it is out in hardback and it is about to come out in paperback momentarily. So please check out the book. My name is Laura Gassner Otting. All my friends call me LGO. So I am at Hey, HEYLGO on all the socials. Please come
Um,
find me.
Amazing. I know our leaders will definitely be coming to find you, your TED Talk, and your book. And the book can be found, I'm assuming, Amazon and all
Amazon,
major
Barnes and Noble, anywhere fine books are sold.
bookstores.
Yep.
Incredible. And for us here at Team Elite, head on over to the website elitehighperformance.com for all leadership development and training needs, one-on-one executive coaching, high performance coaching certifications. We got it all, including the Legacy League, our community of Leadership 2.0. Like-minded folks. This is where we go and we support one another on our flight path to that legacy we just talked about today. Laura, this has been fantastic. We are definitely going to have to invite you back for a part 2. I feel like there's another book in you surely coming down this
Oh,
pipeline.
I'm already working on it.
So that's where we'll leave our listeners with the ... on the next book. Thank you, everybody, and we will see you back here next week.
Thank you so much.